It's an old French word. I think you call it pote, poulet, something other. It meant chicken. And when our forefathers and mothers came across the water, see, I didn't know this, but I looked it up. And those little furry white and black critters, they like chickens, right? They'll get you little chickens if you're not careful. Of course, that's just nature. And some of our old forefathers in colonial America that descended in New French pretty good apparently, made an English word based on a French word that means chicken, but they started calling skunks polecats. Now, how many know how come we call a skunk a polecat? Everybody in the crowd does. Ha! We just learned something. Ain't that exciting? You say, ain't got nothing to do with nothing. The point is, learn. There ain't a human being alive that knows everything. So, and to say that I know everything there is to know about Jesus is to fool myself. Because he's infinite. He's eternal. He's from everlasting to everlasting. But I want to learn more about him every day. That's the story again of Blessed Martha. Jesus loved Martha and she knew and loved him. But she was busy in the kitchen working. And Jesus said, Martha, you're cumbered about with much serving. And she kept coming over there and looking, you know, out in the living room. And there little Mary was just sitting down on the floor right at Jesus' feet. And he was teaching. And Martha got it all wrong. See, people think, don't get things wrong. Just be patient. See, there would be a lot of confusion eliminated if we just read the other parts of the Bible that says be long-suffering and gentle and kind and patient. You're probably going to get the very thing you want if you just shh. Some of us come in the lobby today. I like what you said, Debbie. Somebody said you told somebody shut up and dance. Just shut up and dance. You could worry about all these things. And you can get divided and tore up and say, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like the other. But do you love Jesus? And if you just cast your cares on him, and I've asked you millions of times through the years, just be still. And know that he's God and wait on the Lord. And don't try to get and following a lie and an untruth. And then those negative energies just start dominoing. You get into anger. You get into resentment. You get into unforgiveness. You get into criticism. And it's all founded in pride because following the lie of the devil takes you further and further and further away from the light of that word and the light of truth. And I'm out here rattling pots and pans. And I'm looking over there and saying, that lazy sister of mine, she ought to know I need her to help me with these biscuits. She ought to know I need her to do a little something else. I got this pot on the stove, that pot on the stove. Look, hey! Well, finally, she just put her apron down, went over. Can you imagine? Went over at that door, looked over at that living room, and said, now look at that! Said to herself, look at my sister. She's lazy. She's derelict of her duty, and she's shunning her responsibilities. She ought to be out here helping me. And so you go back over there. Now she burns her finger on the pot, and she lays her elbow over on the hot eye, jumps around. Hey, what's the matter with Jesus? Now we're getting to the objective of the devil. She goes back over and says, what's the matter with him? He ought to know what I'm doing over here good. Now look at him over there. He's a blessing the mess. He's a blessing laziness. That's the mind. Didn't we hear a message the other night in revival? He thought. Naaman thought there was a better river in Syria. Naaman thought that Elijah ought to waved his arm, prayed a big prayer, and got that leprosy off of him. Naaman's problem was he thought. Until finally that little Hebrew maiden and that captain of his, or that officer of his, finally straightened him out and said, you better think again. Hey, we better think again. Then he knew. Because she just kept getting frustrated and aggravated. Get out of that old negative stuff that a lie and the untruth will take you. Now she goes back over and she says, Jesus, how about commanding my sister to help me? I'm busy and she just sitting there wasting time, and you ought to know better than to let that go on. Boy, we think the wrong thing sometimes. And Jesus said, Martha, you're cumbered about with serving, but your sister has chosen that good part that will never be taken away from her. So once you get salvation, you get a supply. A variety. See, the grace of God that brings salvation in Titus chapter 1 says that the grace of God that brings salvation hath appeared unto all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. So this truth that saved you will supply all your need. And this will sanctify you. This will stabilize you. You remember the Roman army? We preached it for many, many years ago. When Paul talked about in Ephesians 6, put on the whole armor of God, he was talking about, had ideas, where it was coming from was the standard issues in the Roman army of the helmet, the breastplate, the traction of their cleats on their shoes and their feet shod, the sword of the Spirit and the shield of faith. Talk about all those, but let's get it down to the loin girdle of truth. The Roman army had a lot of advantages in their day, but one of the great strategic advantages was that loin girdle, they called it. And it stabilized their hip regions. And, of course, every piece of that armor was particularly designed for certain advantages. And if you remember that sermon, that a long time ago. But the loin girdle of truth, Paul said that loin girdle stabilized them with a low point of gravity. You used to play football. Did you like that little old linebacker or that lineman that had a low center of gravity, that little, what do you call it, a fire plug? You can't have, if you've had any type of martial arts training, you probably know, I know Sergeant Bradford was talking about this here a few months ago, a horse stance. Now, some of you don't know what a horse stance is. That just gets you in the center of balance. Some old drunk redneck, y'all used to think you could whoop real easy because they'd just stand there half drunk. They didn't have any balance. Eddie could just blow on them, they'd hit the deck. But you take somebody that's trained, especially in special forces or some type of defense modes of the Orient, and they get down there balanced. I can't get in that horse stance. I told those teenagers over in Galax this week. I used to, and some of you know what I'm talking about. From your knee to your hip, your femur bone is to be parallel with the floor. Oh, can't do it. I ain't 20 no more. But the point is, you get down there in that balanced position, you can launch attacks anywhere in that opponent's body, from their ankle to their cranium, and especially their most vulnerable positions.